Hello virtual doll convention members, welcome to my studio. This is my clothing update on my ongoing Charlcie project where I'm making reproductions of sweet Charlcie here and trying out a larger body. If you'll remember previously I mentioned that she's really just a head of an Izannah Walker doll. And at some point in her life, she lost her original body and she's been sewn onto a sort of early 1900s baby doll body. If you think about the Bilo babies, that kind of frog-shaped body, that's what she's got now. And it's super funky and really adorable, but it's just not right for her. It has polka dot arms, if you can imagine. So I've been doing 3 different reproductions of Charlcie. I handmade the molds of her head, and then I've made the pressed cloth heads, and I went ahead and after doing a lot of research, I've sort of determined that I think she was probably a 23-inch doll originally. It's hard to say for sure, but that seems to be about right. So I'm trying out a 23-inch body, and what I did is I researched a lot of larger 23-inch Izannahs, and then I measured, oh gosh, pretty much my whole collection of Izannah Walker dolls, and determined that, you know, if I scaled up from the 18-inch size and the 20-inch size, that I'd probably come pretty close. So that's what I've done. So now what you're seeing is the original Charlcie and her head, which remember is the only authentic Izannah Walker part left that she has. And she's in blue. And then the 3 dolls in pink are the reproductions. And 2 of them are standing here in their second skins, which is sort of a, oh, really cool, lovely raspberry pink color. It's an antique fabric. It's the back of a silk crazy quilt that just disintegrated because the silk is shot. It just melted. But I was able to reclaim the back, which is a lovely glazed cotton, and use that for the second skins on all the dolls. Sort of just kind of in tribute to the virtual doll convention and the sort of ongoing pink theme. I know it looks really, really red in the photos, and it's probably going to look that way in this video too, but honestly, in person, it's this yummy, deep raspberry pink. And the 1 doll is dressed, and she is sitting there in a reproduction of the dress that I showed you, oh, way back on the first video of Charlcie. I took that dress, and it's super interesting. I had bought it a long time ago and saved it, and I bought it on eBay, and the seller had said that it was part of the wardrobe of an Izannah Walker doll. And the dress is really just rags, it's just coming apart. But I love the style, and I bought it really for study and to draft from. And it's got these super funky little, almost double sleeves. There's a puff sleeve, but under it there's like a full pagoda sleeve that's elbow length. And that's one of the details that I really, really was curious about, and why I actually spent quite a bit of money for a dress that was falling apart, because I just really wanted to investigate it and learn from it and use it as an example and be able to draft a pattern from it. But the interesting thing is, I sort of took that, oh, wardrobe of an Izannah Walker doll mention with a grain of salt, because a lot of things get attributed to Izannah Walker, and some are and some aren't. I mean, some of it's wishful thinking, some of it's just honest mistakes. But when I made these 23-inch bodies, and I drafted I tried on the falling apart little dress. It was so cool, you guys. I really think it's true. It fit exactly, completely, just like it was made for this body. So if it wasn't actually an Izannah Walker dress, it was something contemporary and really with the very same body shape. Now, admittedly, that could have been a China doll or a paper mache doll, same time period, same sort of body shapes and everything, but it just fit perfectly like it was meant to be. So I drafted the pattern for the dress, and I really didn't have to alter it. I was expecting to have to, make adjustments and stuff, but I didn't. I just went directly with the measurements of the antique dress, and that was perfect. The interesting thing about that dress is it has a 10-inch waist, and the circumference of the skirt is 57 inches. So let's just all think about that for a minute. You're getting 57 inches and it's being cartridge pleated onto a 10-inch waist. If you were an adult woman with a 25-inch waist, or even an older child with a 25-inch waist, then the actual skirt circumference for the dress would be 2.5 times, that 57 inches. It would be, let's see, 114 plus another 25, 23.5, no, 25 and another 3.5 is like 8.5. So we're like at 114 plus 28.5, right? Or something close to that. Anyway, what I'm getting at here is that the skirt circumference is huge compared to the waist. So very, very 1860s Civil War era styling. And the waistband is cartridge pleated. It's sometimes called gauging. That was a very popular way to get these extremely wide skirts onto these tiny narrow waists. It uses a lot of fabric. It gets it tucked in there tightly, and you can get a lot more volume into a smaller space compared to just gathering. So when I did this, of course, I replicated that cartridge pleating, and of course this all has to be done by hand. It's kind of a laborious process where you can see these are each little tiny little pleats, and just the tip of the pleat has been caught with the thread and hand sewn onto the waistband. So that was a super fun dress to replicate. It was very, very interesting, and since I had been wanting to do that for like a dozen years, that was very exciting to me. I used, if you'll remember from some of the other updates, the back of an antique quilt. The front of the quilt, unfortunately, was in very, very, very bad condition, but the back was still pretty good, and it was made up of 2 colors. It was made up of this lovely double pink fabric, and it's also made of an indigo print. And the indigo print is probably a little bit later than the double pink. But with quilts, people saved fabrics and reused fabrics, and sometimes fabrics of different ages end up in the same quilt. So I really love that idea. If you'll notice that Charlcie, the actual real Charlcie, is dressed in an indigo print dress at the moment. That just happened to be one from my antique clothing stash that fit this funky little body she's on at the moment. So I kind of just thought that was fitting that I was using this quilt that was those 2 different fabrics. And now that the dress is made, you can see it. It does have lace trim on the pagoda sleeves, just like the original. This fabric is in really quite good condition, but it does have, a few little marks of age, like you would expect on an antique textile. It's got just a few little stains, probably from being stored in a trunk, or possibly rainwater coming in an attic or something like that. But on the whole, it's quite good. It also happened to be a tied quilt rather than a hand quilted quilt. And so here and there are needle marks where the yarn that it was tied with went through the fabric. Now, those will eventually sort of close up, and they are a lot better now that I washed the dress. I will tell you, when I work on these antique fabrics, what I do is I take the quilt apart, and then I usually just go ahead and cut out the dress from the fabric right then and there. I don't clean it at that point, unless it's really awful. But if it's, you know, if it's not too gross, then I just go ahead and work on it right like that. And I go ahead and sew the dress, and I put it all together, and then I wash the dress. And I do that because I don't want to get carried away and just over stress the textile. These fabrics are very old, and you want to treat them gently and appropriately. So after the dress is made, I wash it in Orvis. A lot of you probably know about that. You can find it in, quilting shops. There used to be a lot of that around, but you know, sadly, there's not quite as many quilting shops as there used to be. But you can find it in quilt washing supplies, or you can go to your nearest store that has equestrian supplies, because it is actually also used to shampoo horses. But it's a neutral pH, it's very gentle, it's what textile conservators use, and that's what I use. So I wash the dresses and I rinse them thoroughly, and you should use distilled water, or if you're like me and you live someplace where there's usually a lot of humidity in the summer, I actually sometimes use the water from my dehumidifier, because that's being drawn from the air and it's pure and it doesn't have any minerals or anything in it. Just, you know, it's just being condensed from the air. So you can do that too and save a little money. But the dresses are rinsed really well in clear water, and then I hang them to dry. As a general rule, I do not iron my antique fabrics unless it's really necessary. I just don't do that, because your biggest enemies of antique fabrics are light and heat. And I know that the antique dolls dressed in the antique clothes that are clean and crisp and lovely and starched look so amazing. But really, I try to avoid putting that sort of stress on antique fabrics. And the other really cool thing about if you wash them and then hang them to dry, all of that fabric is going to settle into the natural folds that will make this dress look like it has been put together, you know, for 100 years. The fabric is going to just naturally fall as it would have had the dress been constructed for a long time. And that gives you the look of a really old textile. Now, obviously, this is greatly enhanced by the fact that it's antique fabric to start with. And the fabric is soft, and it doesn't have as much body as a brand new fabric that has a lot of sizing and stuff in it. And actually, you know, this is what I want, because I want the dolls to look appropriately dressed. And they are antique reproductions. So, you know, that's why I generally use antique fabric. Occasionally I will use brand new fabric if somebody requests it, and then I do use a reproduction print, of which there are so many, and they're lovely and amazing and fantastic. But the weight of the fabric and how closely the threads are woven is much different with a reproduction fabric, because most of that is being done for quilters. And the quilters, I mean, come on, let's face it, if any of you guys quilt, you know quilting is a long, laborious, hard, difficult, time-consuming process. It's fun, and if you are a quilter, You do it for the pure joy. But it's difficult and lengthy, and you want the quilt to last for a very long time, because after all, you've put, you know, sometimes years of your life into this textile. And so modern quilt fabrics have a very higher thread count. The fabric is much sturdier than antique fabrics and the antique cotton prints that they are patterned after. So while it's great fabric, I mean, it really is, but you're going to get a different look to it if you have a new fabric, because it's just not going to hang the same because the fabric's heavier. So anyway, this is the antique fabric. The dress is all made up, and she does have a complete set of undergarments. I'm going to provide still pictures of that, because I think sometimes you can see the detail better in the still photographs. I am filming this in HD, but by the time I put it on Facebook, I kind of feel that some of the details and the close-ups and stuff don't always show up. Now, this dress has a 2-inch hem, which is nice. You want a nice deep hem. Sometimes I do 3-inch hems, but the original dress had a 2-inch hem, so that's what I went with. And also, this pink is showing up so much darker on camera than it is in real life, but it's just a lovely, lovely print. It's kind of what they call a coral print. You see all those crazy little lines, and it sort of mimics the way coral grows under the ocean. So that's why they're called coral prints. And they came in pinks, and they came in browns, and sometimes in other colors. I have this really cool quilt that has a black and cream coral print with 2 different colorways, one with a pale green and one with sort of this Prussian blue, and that's amazing. So they did come in a lot of different colors, but it's very, very common to see that coral print on a double pink or on a brown. So anyway, this sweet doll is dressed. She has a chemise, which you can just barely see peeking out the top of her neckline, and it's here under her sleeves too. And she's got the same second skin as all of her sisters, so the tops of her arms are covered in the raspberry pink, but it's hidden under the chemise, which has a couple of rows of lace. Now, the lace that I used on the sleeve, and it's also on the hems of her panelettes, is this fantastic piece of lace. I have this card of lace because I use antique lace and antique buttons and antique cotton tapes, and really even sometimes antique thread if it's sturdy enough. So I collect all of these things to use to make the doll clothes. And this is this amazing little card of lace. It had never really been used. And it'll tell you it's 12 yards, and it was made in France. And look at this. You just have to love this. 3 cents a yard. In the ends of the lace were 2 teeny tiny itty bitty very old pins that were holding the lace end, shut on this little paper card. And of course, I've taken those little pins and I put them away someplace safe, because at some time or another I'm going to want those little itty bitty antique pins to use on either side of the bib of a pin or apron. So, this is one of the details that I love. I get to collect all of these fantastic, sort of not really forgotten, but bits and pieces of lace and notions and things from generations of sewers that, they were in their sewing boxes and they hadn't gotten a chance to use them yet. And so they were waiting there for just the perfect project. And I do try not to squander this stuff. I am very careful with it. I don't just, as much as I love my granddaughter who's 4, I don't put it on baby clothes. Not something that has to go through the washer. I really save it for the dolls, and I think they appreciate that. Occasionally I make her very fancy reproduction garments, but we don't, you know, wear those every day. So it's not normal everyday use. It's I save all these things for the dolls. And that same is true with the fabrics I use. Obviously the quilting fabrics, but in another one of my videos I did talk about antique petticoats and underwear, and I told you all how I do buy this antique underwear, women's antique underwear, and so there's pantalettes and there's petticoats, lots and lots of petticoats, and sometimes it's really lovely and I cannot bring myself to cut it apart right then and there. And I mentioned that, you know, unless the garments really belong to somebody famous or somebody with local historical significance or something, museums these days, just no matter how lovely it is, if the designer wasn't somebody well known, the person that made it wasn't well known, if it didn't belong to a famous person, they really do not have the money or the space to keep these things forever, because it takes a great deal of money to house them, to store them correctly, to catalog them. You know, this is a problem. You know, we had that recession and money kind of dried up for museums, and I know this because at that time of that recession I was the curator and the director of a small museum here in New England, and you just don't have the resources because people didn't have the money to give, and that's an ongoing problem. So there are all these lovely, amazing garments that if somebody isn't keeping hold of them in a family, or if, you know, or if it gets passed on to somebody who doesn't love them or doesn't remember the people that they originally belonged to, or simply does not have the room to keep them also, they are floating around out there and they get sold, and I buy them. And they're not always perfect, but if they are really perfect, I do try to, I wear them. I wear them for a while until something happens so that they're not fit to be a human garment, and then I cut apart all the best bits and use them for the dolls. Now, that's what this petticoat is. This is the top of an antique slip. I never actually wore this one. I bought it from this wonderful estate sale at this very old house that's not too far from where I live, about 5 minutes away from me. But the house was from about 1730, and it had all these people that lived in it, and it had been bought by this couple in the 1940s. So you had this terrific mix of really early 18th century overlaid by 1940s idea of colonial furnishings. And the woman who had lived there last loved textiles and antiques and clothing, and she had collected all of these fabulous antique garments, and some of the things were petticoats. And this is the top of one of those petticoats, and I was really drawn to this particular hunk. I can't really say exactly why, but I love it dearly, and so I included it as part of the doll's wardrobe. And this is just a fragment of it. The whole petticoat had a lot of issues, a whole lot of issues. But if you'll see this teeny tiny amazing little cartridge pleating up at the top, I mean, that deserved to be saved right then and there. And the fabric itself, it's a very sheer, soft cotton, but it feels, oh, so wonderful when you touch it. It's so soft and so smooth. It's a bit like your very favorite jeans that are so worn that they're starting to get holes in it, and also a bit like the softest velvet. It's just, it's a dream to touch, and it's a little fragile, but I've got it stabilized at the moment. And I've gone ahead and taken the bit of the waistband, but the back part is super interesting. there was this cool little piecing. Obviously, you'll see this in a lot of antique quilts, a lot of antique garments. If they didn't have quite enough, they just pieced it. They just made a seam until they could, you know, get enough fabric to do what they needed to do. And that happens. And one side of the placket at the back was already hemmed and stuff, and so then I just matched that hemming, and it had this funky little tape just tying it closed. And since it's going on a doll and not on an adult, I was able to cut that little tape in half and put it on both sides, and I left that tie there. Now, a lot of times on doll petticoats you will see a button or a hook and eye, but sometimes they have little ties like this. So I went ahead and saved that little tie. And the other fun thing about the real petticoat, the adult size version that I took apart to get this fabric, is it had this pocket. Somebody had sewn a pocket onto the petticoat later, and it was sort of acting as a patch, kind of covering a hole, but I felt that it was a huge, deep pocket, and I felt that probably somebody was using it for security purposes to safely carry around something under their skirts. I could be wrong, but it was a pretty darn big pocket. So I've added a little pocket just in memory of that pocket on the real petticoat. And also what I've preserved, and one of the reasons I was really, really drawn to this petticoat is somewhere here, there's the most fantastic darn. Now, okay, darning is repairing a tear, but if it's done well, it's just amazing. And this was hand darned, and it was an L-shaped tear. And you know, sometimes I like to save those bits. I know that not everybody probably is thinking, oh my God, this woman is using torn up underwear to make doll clothes. And I do sometimes, really I do. But I do that because the handwork on this darning is just fabulous. If I go in any closer, it's not gonna, I don't think it's gonna, oh yeah, it is gonna show up. Okay, this is all stitched by hand. Look at that. Look how fantastic that repair is. That took a long time. It was done with a great deal of skill, and I just kind of felt that it needed to be preserved. So when I put these clothes together, it's a lot like being a collage artist. I'm taking all these different fabrics and all these trims and notions and buttons and things and creating a story and a history. And, you know, not everybody looks at it that way, but I do, because I want you to have this feeling when you're around my dolls that they have a story to tell, that they have a history. Yes, they're reproductions, and really, you know, honestly, people buy them because they can't afford or can't find the real doll. Izannah Walker dolls are in very short supply. They've always been expensive, extremely expensive, and they're kind of like crazy out of sight at the moment. But they are these wonderful things that just make you feel good to be around them. And I want people who have my dolls to feel that way too. So I want the clothing to convey that same feeling, that feeling of history, that feeling of things that have happened, of stories, of people's lives and the time that have been put into taking care of these textiles and reusing them, because textiles themselves, fabrics, used to be worth a great deal of money. They weren't as throwaway as they are now. They were very valuable in their own, and they got reused and recycled, and that's a lesson that we're slowly beginning to learn again, to value things and to recycle them, and I think it's a better way to go. But enough of my little soapbox thing on fabrics. Anyway, so when I put the clothing together, I use all of these various bits and pieces, and I hope that it makes the doll's new owners happy. It does make me happy. But I have to say, Again, I do make dolls that look brand new because some people love the thought of, oh my